I know we have a couple of youngsters from the school who I'm very, very excited to hear from. If they're around, if they can come on up. Anybody else wants to ask questions, I'll be happy to take a few questions. But I promised the pastor that we do the kids if they're around. They're coming? Okay. Do we have a microphone for them, or okay? There you go. Say your name and belt it out.
I'm Matt Lindahl.
Let's give a clap for Matt. Nice being able to wear shorts to school. That's nice. I like that.
There's a lot of families who came to the United States for a better life. What can be done to solve the immigration issue in America?
I just go back to my heritage and what we went through, and I talked about this last night. We're a country that people all over the world want to come to. Why do they want to come here? Freedom. What's necessary for freedom? Right? Freedom, responsibility, that's right. But we have to have laws that protect freedom, right? And so those laws are essential for us to have an ordered society where people can be free. Because as we all know, people aren't born good. I have 7 children. I guarantee you. From experience, I know this. That they need to be shaped. They need to be shaped by their parents, by the church, by their communities, by their Little League coaches, right? And by the laws. The laws teach. The laws are important. And so people come here because we have freedom and we have respect for the rule of law. We have respect for the rule of law. That if people do things according to the law, they're allowed to be free and pursue their dreams. And if they violate the law and infringe on somebody else's rights, then they pay a penalty for doing so. Sometimes a very steep one, right? And so I say to people who want to come to this country, the best way you can show me that you want to be a great American is to show me that you respect the laws of America. And so what I've said repeatedly is I want people who want to be Americans, who want to add to the riches of this country. I'm not one of these guys. My dad came in, okay, we're bringing up the drawbridge. No, we can't do that. We shouldn't do that. Those who come into this country and from overseas, who want to be Americans, who want to live by our laws and prosper and have freedom and opportunity, they continue to inject enthusiasm and vigor into the American culture. Diversity is an important thing. Not the most important thing. Most important thing is not diversity. That's what the left would have you believe. The most important thing is what is on our great seal. E pluribus unum. Out of many. Diversity. One. See, the key to America is not our diversity. It's even with our diversity, we can come together and be one people. We can be a melting pot, not a salad bowl. Right? We all keep our unique characteristics and our traditions, but we become Americans. And so I really believe that legal immigration continues to be a very important thing for our country and support it. But when it comes to people who didn't come to this country legally, then my feeling is that what do we say to all the folks like my grandfather and my dad? And like so many people here who did make the sacrifices, who did leave as my grandfather did 5 years and my dad didn't have a dad growing up. Because he made the sacrifices because America was worth it. America was worth making the sacrifice and obeying the rule of law. And he set a template for our family that I think is an important one. So my answer to that is that I have no ill feelings toward anybody, but the bottom line is, come the right way. Come the right way. let's go with the next questioner over here. Go ahead.
What roles do you think faith and politics play in the lives of everyday Americans?
The question is, what does faith and politics play in the lives of everyday Americans? There was a book written, I think just last year, by a guy named Niall Ferguson, who wrote a book called Civilization. He's a Harvard professor. And in that book, he interviewed a Chinese bureaucrat who decades ago served in the Chinese government. As Rush Limbaugh would say, the Chi-Coms, the mainland China. And they were thinking about changing their economic structure. They were thinking about how they could go out in this new world and compete and open up and compete against America. And so they put this group of very smart people together to analyze what made America great. He said, this is what the book described. He said, first we looked at this Chinese expert. He said, first we looked at their military and thought, well, maybe it was your military that made you the greatest country. They said, no, they figured out that wasn't it. Then they thought, well, maybe it's the economy. They said, no, not the economy. He said, then we looked at the system of government. Maybe it was your constitution and your system of government. No, that wasn't it. He said, 20 years ago, we figured out that what made America the greatest country in the history of the world was one word: faith. Faith. It goes back to those principles I talked about before. One of my favorite quotes, and I'll paraphrase, is from Edmund Burke, who said that we are going to be constrained by change that we put on ourselves from within, or we will be constrained by the change that government puts on us from without. The better we are, the more moral and decent, the more virtuous, which of course in the vast majority of cases in America comes through faith. The more faith-filled we are as a country, the more free of a country we will be. Right? And the more free a country we are, the more prosperous we will be. The richer we will be in every sense. You go in the neighborhoods where there is no freedom, into the tough neighborhoods of America. What do you find? You find tough neighborhoods where people are not living good and decent lives. And what do you see? You see people with 20 locks on their doors afraid to go out at night. They're not free. They're afraid to go to the grocery store. I remember going to William Penn High School in North Philadelphia on Broad Street, one of the tough neighborhoods next to a big public housing project. I remember going into that school and I was going to meet with the senior class. It's a big school. I was going to meet with the senior class and talk to the folks who were going to college from that senior class. Now, I would be surprised if they had 700-800 kids in their senior class. It's a huge school. And so I thought I would go into this little auditorium and talk to the kids who were going to college. I went into a very small classroom with 25 kids. And I asked them, because you could see they were uncomfortable. They had trouble looking me in the eye. They were nervous. The reporters there. And I said to them, what's your greatest obstacle to success? One little boy raised his hand in the back and said, getting to school alive every day. And then one of them talked about how they're bullied and beat up on because they achieve. They're not free, folks. They are not free. This shouldn't and can't be happening in America. We should have an understanding that what makes the opportunities for all of these children to be free is that they have strong families, who have strong faith commitments, who live in communities where people do look out for each other. And we have built this great country from the bottom up. You see, the results of what we saw at William Penn High School was an attempt by the government to build it from the top down. And it fails. It fails because it doesn't take into consideration the most important things that make this country free. I have a tour that Usually I have a banner behind me it's called Faith, Family, and Freedom. And after a while I said that's the wrong title. It should be Faith plus Family equals Freedom. So the role of faith, to answer your question, should be vibrant. James Madison referred to faith and free speech as the perfect remedy of people coming into the public square and making their case. Faith-based or not, it didn't matter. People of faith or no faith, people of different faiths can come in and make their arguments about what's right for America and not be discriminated against as they are now by this administration. You look at what this administration is doing to people of faith. You saw just recently the Supreme Court in a stunning 9-0 decision kicked the administration in the teeth on not being able to hire ministers, right? Not being able to hire and fire ministers unless they had certain rights protected, that they could fire them because they didn't share their religious beliefs. 9-0 decision that said, what are you folks doing? Churches and religious organizations should be able to hire people. Freedom of religion is in the First Amendment. It is the first of the freedom. What does the freedom of assembly mean? What does the freedom of speech mean? What does the freedom of press mean if you can't write what you believe? If freedom of conscience doesn't exist? It is the first of the freedoms. It is the trunk by which all other freedoms grow from. And so it is an absolutely essential element of our society, not just from the standpoint of forming us, but in keeping us free. Yes, ma'am, in the back. I think there was a question back there. I saw somebody raise their hand. Yes, ma'am.
Senator, by the way, I'm from Orwell Hill, Pennsylvania, in Bradford County. So,
Nice to see you. Thank you.
I have a question. If I have a lot of independent friends, and I want to... Can't hear you.
I can hear. I'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
Anything that I can say to them to convince them to vote for you? What are you going to tell independents who are so terrified of your very conservative social message?
Okay, the question is, she has some independent friends and they're concerned because I'm a strong social conservative. Well, here's what I would say. Look at the other candidates in this race. Look at Mitt Romney and look at Newt Gingrich. And let's look at their positions on the social issues. Today, I'm not saying in the past, I'm talking today. What they say they're for. They all say they're pro-life, right? You're going to have a Republican nominee is going to be a pro-life nominee. They all say they're for traditional marriage. They all say they were against embryonic stem cell research. You heard Newt Gingrich yesterday talk about the Terry Schiavo incident, which I did take the leadership on, and I'm very proud that I did take the leadership on. And by the way, just as a point, it passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate. Ted Kennedy voted for that. Harry Reid voted for that. Barbara Boxer. So the idea that somehow or another, and this is the point I'm making, that somehow Barack Obama believes marriage should be between a man and a woman. That's what he says. So what extreme are we talking about here? I mean, that's I know I have strongly held. The difference between me and the other candidates is I actually talk about it. Because when I hold a position that I think is important, I share why I think it's an important position. But the other candidates say that they believe the same thing. Now, you can question whether they really do believe it or not. But here's what I would say to your independent friend. If they disagree with these positions, who are you going to feel more comfortable with? Someone that you look at and you say, you know what, they all have the same opinion, but I really believe this guy really believes what he says he believes. Or, on such important issues, are you going to trust someone that, well, they say it, but they probably just saying it because they sort of have to say it to win the nomination? Now, maybe that makes you feel more comfortable because maybe you think, well, they won't do things in that area that maybe I would do. But you're electing a president as a leader. Don't you want to trust that person? That they're going to do what they say they're going to do? You're not going to find anybody who agrees with any one of us up here on every issue. The only way you can find the perfect candidate for president is all of you run for president, right? And that isn't going to happen. So you gotta say, well, who do I agree with most of the time? Who do I believe would be the best for the country? And if I disagree with them on the issue, are they sincere about it? Are they someone we can trust, even though I may not agree with them? And I can tell you, as you know, you were from Pennsylvania, that I got a lot of votes in winning 2 Senate elections in Pennsylvania from people who didn't agree with me. But I would hear this all the time. I know you're telling us the truth. I know that we can trust you, that when you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it, as opposed to someone who I believe and then they turn their back on me and go something that I don't agree with. I'd rather trust you with the 90% I agree with than being surprised with the 10% I don't. Yes, ma'am.
What are your top 3 things you want to accomplish?
Top 3 things I want to accomplish. Number 1, repeal Obamacare, first and foremost. I was just down in Sarasota County and went through a storm window manufacturer. They make these laminated windows that are impact resistant and made it here in America. And he talked about how his costs are going up under Obamacare now, even before it's implemented. Why? Well, covering 26-year-olds, parents' policies. What's happening? Well, now these companies now have to cover kids up to the age of 26. That sounds great. Oh, we're covering kids. Well, what's that mean? That means their costs are going to go up, right?
Right.
By the way, he said, well, they're not kids anymore. It's very interesting. I read recently that the word teenager didn't exist until the 1950s. We had children and adults. Now we have extended adolescence, extended everything. I mean, what are we telling our children? You know, it's amazing that we have so stopped this delineation. Is that, you know, it's time at some point that you got to go out and make it and do it on your own.
Yeah.
And we just extend childhood forever and ever. But it's hurting that business. Obamacare is hurting that the pre-existing condition issue. I mean, you can look at what it's done to drive up costs, and as a result, they haven't been able to give a pay increase this year because their health care costs went up so much, 7%. So Obamacare is number 1. It's a fundamental threat to our freedom and our sovereignty, in my opinion. Number 2 is we need to put forth a pro-growth package to get this economy going. And I put forth a package that the Wall Street Journal called Bold. The way they titled it was Supply Side Economics for the Working Man. We put forth a plan that cut taxes and simplified the tax code, but also focused on what we're going to do to get the sector of the economy that's struggling the most, and that's the manufacturing sector. Those jobs that are created for blue-collar workers to be able to get the jobs that can support a family and be able to rise in society. We have so many people. I mean, if you look at the numbers, people are really pessimistic about the future of our country, and particularly their future and their children's futures, that it will be better than it was before. And the bottom line is, one of the reasons is you have so many people in America who feel they're out there and that the left, all they want to do is give them benefits, give them government benefits and make them dependent. And the folks on the Republican side, all they want to do is talk about tax cuts for higher income people. That isn't them. And it's hard for them to see how that's going to make a difference in their lives. Well, we're going out, as I did when I was in Pennsylvania, and I won elections there. I won in heavily Democratic states and congressional districts because I come from a steel town as a grandson of a coal miner, and I know what it means to keep those towns alive, because those towns aren't just staying alive to help people employed, but it's the small towns of America that hold the traditional values that make this country great and will keep it great. And if those... Look at a map of the United States at election time. You see about 95% of the map covered by counties with red counties. Small town in rural America. The values that represent the conservative values that are here. But where are the blue areas? They're getting deeper and darker blue because they're getting bigger. And the values there are very different. You want to keep the values of America in place, then we have to keep jobs in small town America, and that's manufacturing, and that's the number 2 thing I would do. Number 3, $5 trillion in cuts over 5 years. We will push for a balanced budget amendment. We will reform government. We will erase this deficit. We will get government down to size, where the Constitution intended it. Take another question? Go ahead.
When do you feel judicial activism is appropriate?
I don't believe ever that judicial activism is appropriate. Our Constitution, I have my copy, I always carry it with me. If $20, not $100 bill there, $20 bill. The Constitution lays out the government in 3 articles, the 3 branches of government. What branch of the government did they put first? The Congress. Why? Why do you put it first? Because it's the most important. You put the most important, you don't put the least important thing first, you put the most, and by the way, it's the longest section. It has the most powers. It's the people's body. What's the second section? The president. Limited power, smaller section. Commander-in-chief, negotiate treaties. Veto bills. Third section, the courts, a little itty-bitty section. Establishes one court, the Supreme Court. Whose job is it to establish the other courts? The Congress and the President. It's pretty clear that, and we are allowed to establish the jurisdiction of the court, so we can say what the court can hear and what they can't. All of these things are in the power of the Congress, yet we have a court system that has decided, no, they're the most powerful branch of the government. They're the ones who can dictate to us what is constitutional, what is not, and what we have to do as a result of that. It's not just saying, well, this is right or this is not, then limiting Congress's ability to govern in that area. Going far beyond deciding the case. See, I see the courts as a referee, a necessary one. But we all know, I bet you there's a few football fans around here. I bet you the umpire in a professional football game or a college game could call holding on every single play. You could call holding on every single play, but you don't. Why? Because it screws up the game. You want to let people, the whole idea of the umpire or the referee, the umpire is the guy behind the defensive line, the whole idea of the officiating staff is so that the two teams can go out there and on a level playing field have an opportunity to compete fairly. Well, that's what the courts are supposed to do. The Congress passes the laws, and the courts are the referees that enforce the laws. And what the courts have decided to do is not just throw flags on every play, but to actually suit up and play quarterback for some of the teams and call plays and decide the issue. Grant them touchdowns, even though that's not what the penalty was called on. This is the problem of our judiciary, and it is incumbent upon the president and the Congress to go out and make the case. We haven't had a president who's willing to do that. I've talked about bold proposals and what we're going to do to try to change the judiciary. We're not going to be able to do that unless we go out and make the case that a tyranny of an oligarchy of a judiciary is a threat to fundamental freedoms in this country, and the American people must join us in this fight. I'll take 2 more questions. One here, and then we'll take your question over here. These 2. Go ahead.
Senator, all about foreign aid. We send so much money to Haiti. We send so much money out of this country. What about this country right now? I can take you down the street 2 miles from here. Men are living in the woods and tents and food to eat. What are you going to do about that?
Question is about poverty in this country and comparing it to the money that we gave to Haiti. How much money do we spend in foreign aid?
Billion.
What percentage of the overall budget do we spend in foreign aid? 5%. Less than 0.5%. Okay? And I don't know about you, but when I see a disaster of the scale of Haiti, I don't think I'm going to sit in the sidelines and say suffer. Okay? I mean, hold on. Back in 1960, 20% of the, 1960, 60% of the government was the military. Today it's 20%. Foreign aid is 0.5%. 80% is programs to help take care of the folks, in many cases, who are living in those woods. It's not that there's 72 means test and entitlement programs. 72. Plus a whole bunch of block grants that give the states the flexibility to deal with a lot of these issues. The problem is that it's not the problem of too few resources coming from government. It's the problem that I talked about before. The problem is in the home. The problem is in the churches. The problem is in the community. These men and women living in these woods are not the federal government's problem. They're your neighbors. We have become so desensitized that somehow or another, if there's a problem, well, Washington's going to solve it. Why? Because we pay so much taxes and we feel so regulated, and so we're all just scrambling to make ends meet. And what we need to do is reduce that burden, create more freedom, support the American family. People say, well, what can you do to support the American family? 30 years ago, 71% of the people in this country over the age of 18 were married. It's now 51%. And it's dropped 5% in the last 3 years. The state of marriage in America is in crisis. And as a result, you're seeing the ravages of it. You're seeing the ravages of the breakdown of the family. You're seeing the ravages of the people in the faith community not stepping up and preaching the truth and taking responsibility for their brothers and sisters. You want America to have limited government, then we better do more. And that means we have to strengthen that family. We have to strengthen the two-parent family. It's not that one-parent families don't do heroic work and moms don't do an incredible job raising children, doing the job of a mom and a dad in a society that is hard to do it with two. But it is harder. And there is a higher failure rate, economically and otherwise in many cases. Higher drug use, higher dropouts, higher economic failure, higher out-of-wedlock birth, everything 2-3 times higher when families are broken. And what are we as a society doing about it? Nothing. Virtually nothing. When I was in the United States Senate, I actually put forward a program and said we should have a healthy marriage program to try to promote marriage in our society. And then we should have abstinence programs to try to promote abstinence so young children don't get involved in at-risk behavior. But let's be honest, that's the church's role. That's the community's role. We should be doing this in a big way, and I will tell you that there was a city in Chattanooga. I write about this in my book. I wrote a book in response to Hillary Clinton's book. She wrote a book called It Takes a Village. I wrote a response called It Takes a Family. And in that book, I talk about the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Okay, let's give a shout out for Chattanooga. Well, Chattanooga, Tennessee is a city, obviously in East Tennessee, where the city fathers were shocked when statistics came out and were publicized in the paper that said that Chattanooga had one of the highest out-of-wedlock birth rates, one of the highest single parenthood rates, and one of the highest divorce rates in the state of Tennessee. And people were embarrassed. Chattanooga's a beautiful little town. And so what did they do? The educators, the business people, the city fathers, and yes, the churches came together and formed a nonprofit to promote healthy marriages, to promote fathers getting back and involved with their children and even with the mothers of their children. to try to bring and reknit this community, this unit that is so important for our society. And within 3 years, they reduced the divorce rate, the out-of-wedlock birth rate, as well as the single parenthood rate by 25%. It is a huge problem in our society. I was talking to Chuck Colson. Chuck lives down here in, I think, this neck of the woods now. And Chuck who was involved in Watergate and went to prison. And he told me when he left prison, there were 250,000 people in prison when he left prison in 1975. And today there are 2.5 million people in prison. He said 70 to 80% of the people, and he has a ministry called Prison Fellowship. He says 70 to 80% of the people in prison today have one thing in common. They grew up without a dad in the home. Ladies and gentlemen, we know what's going to solve the problems of the homeless. We know what's going to solve the problems of those who are on the margins of our society. We have to build a strong, healthy family and faith community in America if we're going to get America to be free and safe and prosperous.